Call the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and will be available on the Township's YouTube page. And notice is hereby given that under the authority of the Municipal Act and in accordance with the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, that all information attained is considered part of the public record. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Milligan, Deputy Reeve Davison, all in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Any declaration of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? None declared. We have a public meeting this evening on development charges. This is the second public meeting we've held. We didn't feel that either enough notice was given or people weren't able to come to the previous one, so we have a second meeting. It's being held pursuant to the Development Charges Act of 1997 regarding proposed development charge rates and policies that will be applied throughout the township if we decide to adopt it. It is proposed that enactment of a development charges bylaw by council would occur on Monday, November 18th, 2024, and council shall hear in person or by his or her counsel, solicitor, or agent any person who claims to be affected by this bylaw. That's the purpose of this meeting. So it's an open meeting in the public meeting part of the agenda. The recommended motion is that the presentation from John Murphy, DFA Infrastructure International, who will be joining us momentarily by Zoom, that presentation, where am I here, of a development background charges study and draft bylaw and public comments be received for information. Can I get a motion just to have that on the floor, please? Councillor Fenwick, Councillor Woodcock, thank you. Mr. Murphy, if you're...
Jason, not hearing anything.
Oh, sorry, Wendy, you're not hearing anything? Councillor McDonald is joining us remotely, but apparently is having trouble hearing. It's good now? Jason, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Murphy, the floor is yours.
Take my audio off and my video. Oh, you cannot start your video. Okay, because the host has stopped it. All right. So I have the presentation here, and I don't know if it's going to be shown on your screen. There you go. Okay, here we go. So I guess the clerk. Okay, so good evening, everyone. I'm John Murphy. I'm here with Derek Alley from DFA Infrastructure. This is the second public meeting in regards to the development charges background study and draft bylaw review. Next page. Or do I have? I don't think I have. There you go. Okay. So the objective of today's, I guess it's public meeting, is to provide a background on the development charges, present the draft development charge study and calculated rates, discuss the draft bylaw and policy decisions to be made, which I understand there's a report in front of council to be discussed later in the evening, present the next steps, and obtain feedback from the public. Next slide. Oh, and I'm going to start my video now. All right. Again, good evening. Okay, so what are development charges? Development charges are fees levied against new development to recover the capital cost required to service the anticipated new growth. And we all know the principle behind development charges is that growth pays for growth, and that there's not a burden put on existing taxpayers for the cost of that anticipated new growth. Now, it should be understood that development charges do not pay for the operating cost of the infrastructure that's funded from development charges, nor do development charges pay for the replacement of those capital assets at the end of their service life. Next slide. Now, the requirements for imposing development charges. Now, municipalities are given the authority to impose the development charges under the Development Charges Act. Now, the Act does require certain steps to be undertaken by the municipality. One, the first step is to prepare a background study The next is to hold at least one public meeting, which council has done already. This is the second public meeting. And of course, pass a development charges bylaw, which gives the authority for the municipality to impose the charges. Now, development charges bylaw are valid for 10 years, in which at the end of their life, the municipality must pass a new bylaw to continue to imposing development charges. Now, this, as noted in the slide, this is the township's first development charge bylaw. Next up, next slide. Okay, so we'll be discussing the draft background study. So next slide. The main components of the background study is the development forecast. Now, there is a historic service level calculation that is required to be made under the Act, and we'll discuss that. And of course, the capital program, these are the costs that are required to support the anticipated new growth. Next slide. Now, the Act identifies 20 specific services which are eligible for development charges. In discussions with staff, we identified 7 service areas that had qualifying capital costs. And those are the admin growth studies, outdoor recreational services, indoor recreational services, fire services, waste diversion, transportation services, and storm sewers. Next slide. Now, the step in regards to the anticipated new growth. My slide on my other screen. So there's 2 types of growth: population growth and employment growth. The county's growth analysis report and Stats Canada information was reviewed, and it was identified, or the projection of residential growth was approximately 1,300 new residents over the next 20 years, with a population employment growth of 326. Now, the residential population was converted to dwelling units. So over the next 20 years, it was forecasted that approximately 525 new dwelling units would be constructed in the township. Now, looking at the first 10 years, it averages approximately 30 new units per year. In the second 10-year period, you're looking at approximately 23 new units. Now, in the first public meeting, a question was raised as to what was the sort of the historical growth in new dwelling units. And we talked to staff, and it appeared that on average over the previous 10 years, the township was looking at 33 new units. So not a material difference between what the historical growth was in dwelling units versus the growth over the next 10 years. Now, employment growth gets converted to a gross floor area, and that is done based on the GFA per employee, based on the employment type. And that employment growth was converted to approximately 26,000 additional square meters of non-residential floor area. Next slide. So, as I said, there is a step that is required to be taken in the calculation of development charges in regards to the historical service level. Now, the Act pretty much states that a municipality cannot recover costs from anticipated new growth that would provide a service level higher than the average service level over the previous 10 years. So when we did our calculation, we have what we call the service level cap, and that's the maximum that can be recovered from the anticipated new growth over the next 10 years. And this service level cap only comes into play with fire services, which will be discussed in a slide farther into the presentation. Next slide. So in discussions with staff, we identified approximately $5.7 million in new capital works, which are either wholly or in part would benefit new growth. and you'll see in the next few slides the deductions that are made from this gross cost. Next slide. So when we look at the net cost to be recovered from anticipated new growth, there's a requirement to look at how much of the gross costs for each project would benefit existing development or existing population versus new growth. And when we did that, we calculated approximately $3.6 million of the 5.7 would benefit the existing population in those capital works. So we reduced the net capital cost to approximately $2 million, which would be eligible for recovery. Then we apply the service level cap. And as you can see for fire services, the service level cap indicated that approximately 1.4 million would be the maximum amount that could be recovered from anticipated new growth to fund new growth fire-related services. So the $325,000, which is left on the table, can be recovered in future development charge studies. So at the end of the day, approximately $1.7 million of the 5.6 or $5.7 million is eligible for recovery from anticipated new growth. Next slide. So that $1.7 million gets allocated between residential growth and non-residential growth. And that, for most of the services, is done based on the proportional share of population growth and employment growth. Now, outdoor and indoor recreation typically benefits population growth, but we applied a nominal or 5% allocation to non-residential growth, because sometimes, that was sort of the industry standard in that regard. Next slide. So 1.4 million of the 1.7 is to be recovered from residential growth, and 300,000 is to be recovered from employment growth. Now, when we divide or look at the calculation, we divide the cost by the growth. In this case, the residential growth in new units is 758 persons, and for the non-residential, we're dividing the non-residential cost allocation by 13,069 additional square meters. So that calculates a rate per capita for residential and a rate per square meter. Now, this is the what we call the unadjusted charge. Now, what we did was adjust that charge based on a cash flow analysis, looking at the timing of the revenues and the timing of the capital expenditures, so that there was a small reduction in those charges. So we have an adjusted residential charge on a per capita basis of $17,076 per capita and $21.73 per square meter. Next slide. So for purposes of calculating a residential development charge based on the dwelling type, we look at the occupancy, or the persons per unit, or the density in those units. And this is from Stats Canada. So the PPU, or the persons per unit factor, was applied to the per capita residential charge to calculate the development charge based on dwelling type, which is shown in the next slide. So we can see that the charge for a single detached unit is $4,548. For an apartment, it's $3,279. And for multiples, it's $4,379. And again, those rates are based on the residential per capita charge multiplied by the PPU, or the density factor, for the three different dwelling types. Next slide. So we compared the draft charge for the township to other townships in the vicinity. And you can see how the average of those comparators is 6,800. So the township's charge is somewhat less. So it's below average. Next slide. We did the same for the non-residential charge. And as you can see, the township's non-residential charge is approximately 67% of the average of those comparator municipalities. Next slide. So one thing that the township needs to do is look at policy decisions. And again, I believe there's a staff report in front of you to be discussed later in the evening. Next slide. So again, the bylaw gives the municipality the authority to impose the development charges. The bylaw also sets out the calculated rates of the development charges, but it also presents the rules for imposing the development charges, which includes the types of developments to be exempt from the charge. And these will be considered discretionary exemptions. The Act does specifically state municipality must exempt certain types of development, and that's currently in the draft bylaw. But we'll show the next slide the types of developments that typically are exempt. And agricultural use, while not specifically exempt in the Act, to my knowledge, all municipalities exempt agricultural use buildings. Also, places of worship is a decision where council needs to make whether they want to exempt churches, mosques, synagogues, public hospitals, temporary buildings and structures ancillary to residential use. Also, a policy decision on redevelopment credits, which, while not specifically granted in the Act, case law does require municipalities to give consideration for existing development that gets redeveloped. And of course, whether council chooses to phase in the charge or discount the charge from the calculated charge. Next slide. So the next steps in this process, obviously, today's November 4th. This is the second public meeting. The first was held on October 7th. I believe it's understood that council is looking to approve the development charge background study and bylaw on November 18th. If that is the case, there's a 40-day appeal period whereby members of the public or stakeholders can appeal the bylaw, and that expires on December 28th. And then I believe council is looking at having the bylaw come into force on January 1st of next year. And to that, I'm here to answer any questions that council or the public have.
Thanks, Mr. Murphy. Just one slight corollary. Council isn't looking to approve the bylaw on November 18th. That is when we will discuss it. And if we decide to approve it, that may happen on that date. Council has made no decision one way or the other. We're just going through the process of gathering information and discussing. So is there anyone here from the public who wishes to speak, to comment, or ask any question? Yes, just come to the microphone, press the silver button. That will turn the mic red and show it's activated. State your name and where you live, and the floor will be yours.
Good evening. My name is Nicole Brooks, and I live in Tamworth. So pardon me, probably what I'm going to be asking is for clarification. One, is it my understanding from what was just presented that this is the first time this is being implemented ever in the history of the township?
That's correct. We do not have development charges in Stone Mills Township.
Thank you for that clarification. The second clarification that I would like to have is it because of inflation or increases of whatever, the reason why the township now is considering implementing these charges?
That's a good question, and there might be a variety of answers. I wonder if someone from staff wants to tackle that. Jake, or Jake is our property man.
Yeah, I think it's kind of back to the beginning, I guess. Development charges are generally charged to allow development and new development to help pay for the many costs that come with development. Now, we think of development charges in bigger communities like, for instance, Toronto, where you could be adding hundreds of thousands of units, over a short period of time. And when you add, significant populations over a short period of time, you end up having to service those new populations. In this study, you don't have, projected huge costs from, I think he just said 1,300 over a significant period of time. In these, we've earmarked for, in the study, if you read it, basically when we rebuild a fire hall, it's going to be slightly larger, and that slightly larger fire hall will cost X amount. And this bylaw will, these charges will help pay for that slightly bigger fire hall. The other thing that's in the study is the tearing down of that salt dome that's out there that's kind of reached its end of life, and replacing it with a larger salt dome, with the thought that there's actually a few more roads over the last 5 years for us to look after and maintain. And then, the costs from these development charges would help to pay for the slightly enlarged salt dome. But in large municipalities, obviously, you're building giant parks for new, and these charges help pay for the many things that greater populations, with the thought that theoretically that the existing ratepayers in the municipality won't then have to pay for the growth related to adding, greater populations to that municipality, if that answers your question.
Somewhat, because even again, from what I gathered from the presentation, historically, the growth of the municipality actually is quite standard. There isn't a great leap. So what has happened a decade before, the same projections are now within the projection for the next coming decade. So I just find that interesting that if it hasn't been implemented before and there isn't that much change in the history of the development of the municipality, that's why I wanted to understand the reasonings. If there was like a huge population growth, like a big thing, then I could quite understand the reasoning in that regard, just because of what you have said, when you compare it to a place like Toronto. So that's why I'm just trying to understand, because I can appreciate, adding something like this in order to build the community, but I'm trying to see what the need is to do that if the pattern in history hasn't changed. That's why I was asking for clarification. The other thing that I just wanted, again, because I wasn't here the first time, so I apologize for the redundancy for me to understand, is that, okay, if it is implemented, there are, of course, exceptions to the rules. And is it my understanding, again, that that is subjective, meaning that it is whomever is looking at the file can make that decision, that there's not a set standard of rules, that it's case by case, and whether whomever is looking at the application deems it fit will make that decision?
In fact, that isn't quite the case.
Okay.
Later in the agenda, there's a proposed list of exemptions for council to consider. And in addition to the ones Mr. Murphy mentioned, like places of worship, agricultural buildings, there are a number of other considerations. So
Okay.
the decision would be you pay development charges unless your proposed development
Includes.
one of those exempted categories, yeah.
Right.
So it wouldn't be subjective, it wouldn't be ad hoc. The
Oh,
idea
okay.
it would be equitable and fair.
Okay, that's fantastic. The property that I own, I am looking more towards agricultural buildings, so I was quite concerned. And I'm new to the community. I think this month will make 2 years. So I'm still trying to understand even how the property taxes are accumulated and what have you. I have paid them, I'm good standing.
Good.
But just really understanding, and then also looking to how the area is being developed and what are the things that you're looking towards in order to welcome new people in? What are the incentives, I guess, basically in that for building and stuff? So this has been really, really helpful, and I look forward to further learning through the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Anyone else from the public? Mr. Storing? Well, I thought you did last time, but if you've got something to add, I'm happy to hear it, Robert.
Firstly, I got to put my cheaters on. I would like to say that I am pleased that there's a few more people out at this meeting tonight, but I'm also at the same time somewhat disappointed that there aren't more people here. I guess apathy is alive and well in our municipality. Before I start, firstly, I want to apologize to Councillor Woodcock. I made a statement on social media, and in that statement I said that Councillor Lalonde had proposed a second meeting, when in fact it was Councillor Woodcock who proposed it. Due to my partial deafness, I think, a terrible hearing system, and that night Councillor Woodcock had a mask on. I did not hear that, and I apologize for saying that. It was indeed you who suggested the first meeting, and Councillor Lalonde moved the motion to have another meeting. So I would also like to address a comment made by Mr. Fenwick, Councillor Fenwick, that the development charges, and he rounded it up to $5,000. In essence, what he was saying wouldn't amount to a heck of a lot. And he said that it would amount, I think, when I re-listened to it, $15 a month or something like that. The actual $5,000 charge would add $28.20 per month to a payment. And you suggested a 30-year amortization. At the end of 30 years, that $5,000 would be $10,150.31. So that's what the development charges would be on a mortgage. According to Canada Mortgage and Housing, every $1,000 that you add on to a mortgage eliminates, and I forget, I don't have the exact figure, so many people from even qualifying for a mortgage. So when people apply for a mortgage now, especially first-time buyers, they have to qualify at a rate 2% higher than what the going mortgage rate is. So right now the going rate's about 5.5, so people have to qualify at 7.5. So when you add this extra $5,000 in, there's going to be a lot of first-time buyers that just won't be able to afford to get a mortgage, or just will not get a mortgage at all. One of the other points that I would like to bring up from Mr. Murphy's presentation, he suggested at the last meeting that his statistics came from the I forget the name of the county report anyways, on growth, and the 2021 census. And I did find those, and I went through them, very lengthy, boring documents, I'll tell you, if you haven't looked at them. And I did see that in the county report, Stone Mills was mentioned, the numbers were given, but generally the numbers were all reported from the census of 2021, which was a general report for the population of the whole county, which takes in Napanee and Amherst View, and then they use some kind of averaging method to come up with those figures. So I brought up at the last meeting that I'd like to have seen a report from this township for the amount of development over the last few years. And Mr. Murphy mentioned tonight that in the last 10 years there have been 33, I think he said, new housing starts. That's nice to hear. That's the first I've heard that. I wish it had been in the initial report. Section 3A of the Development Charges Act says that a development charge is based on a report, I guess, from the previous 15 years. Well, I'm happy with 10, but I would have liked to have seen that in the report, and I still would like to see some kind of written report for growth in this township for the last 10 to 15 years. I do note in the motion, and you mentioned it, John, and the previous speaker mentioned that there were a bunch of exceptions to the bylaws, like a farm, and one of them, which I noted, was demolition or destruction of a property, which is very good. I'm pleased to see that. I do have a question. If somebody was doing something that was in the exception list, is it automatically accepted, or do they have to apply for a minor variance?
That's a good question, Robert. I have no idea. Mr. Murphy, what would be the norm in that situation?
Okay, can he repeat?
Yeah,
If
go ahead,
Mr.
Robert.
Brian, repeat the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, if somebody were applying, if say my house burned down and I applied for a permit and I'm on the exception list that the destruction of a house is an accepted from the bylaw, do I have to apply for a minor variance, or is it just automatically accepted from the bylaw?
So you're asking if your dwelling unit burnt down and you wanted to replace it with a new dwelling unit?
Exactly.
Or, okay, then it's a wash. You're given a credit for the development charge that would otherwise be paid. So if it's, $4,600 or $5,000 charge, you're given a credit of that equivalent amount. It's when you convert, let's say, an old factory into multiple apartment units. What would happen is the credit would be based on the square footage times of the non-residential use times the non-residential charge. That would be your credit.
Yeah.
That would be applied to reducing the charge that you would otherwise pay, which would be the number of new apartments times the apartment rate. It may reduce it down to zero. You'll never get there'll never be a refund, but it won't exceed zero. But it's for a residential dwelling unit to be replaced with another residential dwelling unit, it's a wash.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers the question. I do see the list, and it's a pretty comprehensive list if council decides to adopt it. And that was my question of whether there would be any further fees, because that would delay everything and certainly cost more money. I'm not going to carry on with, I don't have a lot more questions. Since the last meeting, I did a presentation. I do not think that our township, at a time when we've just recently increased our building fees by anywhere from 50 to 150%, should be adding additional fees. It flies in the, again, I'll reiterate, it flies in the face of what all levels of government are trying to do to reduce the cost of housing, to encourage more housing. We obviously have a housing shortage in this whole country, and we're doing something to make it harder for people to build, harder for people to buy. So I would hope the council would look at this very seriously on November the 18th, and I would like to see you not pass this development charges. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. There was someone else. Yes, sir. Come forward, please. Just press the silver button and identify yourself and where you're from, and the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Ryan Dackerell. I live in Yarker. I'm a builder in this area. So I build 2 to 3 houses a year in Stone Mills Township. So my concern is houses in Stone Mills Township are, so building materials everywhere are the same price. Houses in Stone Mills Township aren't worth as much as other townships. So adding more cost to people who are trying to make a living in this area, I'm strongly against it. So South Frontenac, I can go to South Frontenac, I can build the same house, I can make $30,000 to $40,000 more per house. They have development charges, but they also have areas with sewer, with stuff like that. This township has nothing for development. Like, I understand you have to increase your fire halls and stuff like that, but our taxes in this area are already crazy compared to other townships also. Like, I just don't understand why more costs is getting added to building permits have already gone up so much in the last couple years. And now you're adding another $5,000 that we have to try to charge to a customer. And my feedback from buyers in this area, like, so a lot of Toronto people come buy these houses, are how much the taxes are. So I just don't understand why another fee has to be added to building permits when it's, like you said, there's only 30 houses a year getting built. Why am I going to continue building houses if it keeps costing me more and I make less? So now you just added a charge. I can go to Loyalist, I pay that development charge, but I make more on my houses. Does that, you know what I mean? It's the building material is the same every place, but now you're adding more fees to building. So why would I build in this township? It doesn't make, like, if you keep adding and adding and adding, I can't make money. So I guess that's my only concern, is I'm really strongly against this development charge, and I do have quite a few lots in this township, and if I have to just start selling the lots off and going to build in other townships or other municipalities, that's something I'm willing to do, and I know there's other builders that might also do that. I know it's only $5,000, but it's another cost added on to what a hard industry as we, like, it's very tough to build right now. And so I'm just concerned with more fees for this township, like and I'm going to go back to Loyalist or Stone Mill or South Frontenac. I can do a septic in those townships for $10,000. In this township, I have to import everything because it's rock, like everything's rock. So it's expensive to build in this township, so I'm just concerned with more fees. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hi. Just press the button and then identify yourself and where you're from.
Yes, my name is Nadine Rochette. I reside in Tamworth, and I do have concern about this additional fee. We're not at a point where we want to develop our property, but I think I have a few questions as to why it would come forth. Listening to the presentation and reading some of the documentation, my understanding that these are fees that are eligible to be charged back. My question to you, and rhetorically, as a council, are they necessary? Meaning, what is the current budget? Is it running a deficit with the current status? And are those fees really required to be passed on? I understand they're eligible to be passed on, but are they required, right? I will let you sit with that. The comments made by the builder are very valid. This is, as opposed to have a township where we can leverage the fact that there is no development fees, in spite of the fact that our taxes are quite high. We came from a Peterborough area that has all services, including public transportation, sewer, water, and our taxes here are through the roof. Out does a city basically tax. And most of our land is agricultural, and we're getting a 25% off of that. So, due to being agricultural. So I'm very confused as, first of all, the level of tax, and then that the assessment would be made on eligible amounts that can be passed on, not required amount, but they would be eligible, and we would determine that it would make sense to further. So all to say that I'm not in favor of these particular fees on a township that is already receiving a lot of tax for not a lot of services back to the community. In addition to that, the next two levels of government are basically lobbying and telling people that we are going to make it easy for people to develop, to increase the level of housing across Ontario and across Canada, to support the population growth that we've seen over the last 3 years, which is about a million a year, way exceeded what we had anticipated as a country initially and what was forecasted. So any hurdles to further develop, I struggle to understand where our township, at this particular point in time, I'm not saying that in 10 years it won't make sense, but right now in the current environment, with strategy from the next two levels of government, kind of promising something very different than increased fees, I do struggle with this particular study at this particular time, when we know that even the Bank of Canada has reduced rates significantly in order to inject some viability within the construction industry, which has just come to a stop basically over the last 8 months. So I guess I would ask to council, are we running for that we now have because of the way the math works, we've identified money that we can go get, and we're saying we're going to go get it as opposed to asking, should we go get this money? Does it make sense right now at this point in time in this particular township based on the offerings that people currently have at a high tax level? So those are my concerns. So I don't feel that it's the right time. I think that our township has an advantage if those fees are not brought forth and could be attracting a lot of people, and we have the potential of foregoing a lot of that development if those fees are going forth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? You can speak again if you wish, if there's something you forgot to mention the first time. Any comments from council? Councillor Milligan.
So I'm struggling with this a little bit because, and sorry, I have to use my hands. So we have developers here, the municipality here, and people over here that are just trying to survive paying their bills that they have now. They're not planning to build, they're just sitting over here minding their own business. So then we have these capital costs that the township is going to have to pay. So either the developer pays them or the person wanting to build their new home, or the people over here, everybody else, taxes go up. So everyone's complaining about higher taxes. They're going to be even higher if we don't do development charges. So maybe I've oversimplified it. If I have, please let me know. But that's how I understand it. So these folks will be penalized if we don't do them.
Sorry? Yeah, yes, CAO White.
So yeah, just real quickly, back to an earlier comment, municipalities are required to plan for a balanced budget. We don't run deficits. The budgeting process is a little bit backwards to a certain degree than, say, a private business would be, in that the municipality reviews its cost of operations for a year, including capital costs and operating costs, determines what is required in order to run those services at the level of services we're providing, and then sets the tax rates accordingly. And that's how we arrive at a tax. It's not that the tax is set and then we figure out how to spend the money that we receive. Municipalities only have the ability to collect taxes or funds through certain methods. So a salt dome, for example, that was built 20 years ago, I don't know how old the current one is, was built to service a municipality of a certain size. The time for reconstruction comes, the municipality, since it was built, grew, therefore requires a larger facility and needs to be funded through the means that are available to the township, whether that be taxes or development charges. And so if development charges aren't available and the municipality has grown over that time, the entire cost of that facility and the capital cost will be borne exclusively by the taxes. And therefore, 100% of that capital cost will land on the tax levy, as opposed to having some of that burden shift to a development charge model that then says a portion of that growth is funded by the DCs. So the municipality, again, does not fund out of deficit and doesn't plan to run it out of a deficit, but uses the available means to collect what is needed to run the services at the level that the residents expect it to be run at.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comments or questions? Councillor Land.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for coming and sharing your thoughts tonight. It's been really valuable. I just wanted to share something that we received through an email. This gentleman couldn't be here tonight, and but he did bring up one good point that I wanted to share, and that was the idea of phasing the development charges in over a 5-year period, because his thoughts were MPACT is going to be doing a reassessment. They haven't raised their property assessments since 2016, and we all know what's happened to the cost of housing since 2016. So there's this fear and expectation, probably realistic, that, you know, our impact assessment is going to come in somewhat higher than it has been. And so perhaps bearing that in mind, that this wasn't the right time to then also add on a development charge. So I thought his point was valid, and I wanted to share that. I do want to clarify something, though, about the taxes. I've been on council for 11 years now, and we strive every single budget year to make sure that what we're doing with your money is the best that we can do. And your tax bill isn't just Stone Mills. It incorporates the county, it incorporates the school levies, public and private, and also a part of your taxes that you receive are based on the assessment of your property, which we don't do that assessment. That's done by MPACT. So we're just a 25% of that big picture. So no disrespect, but to compare your taxes that you paid in Peterborough, where they have a big tax base of people and their roads are just within that municipality, and our roads go all the way up to almost Caladar. So, and we have only, 8,000 people in this township, so we're trying to provide the best service we can for 8,000 people, and that's based, unfortunately, on the taxes. Now, we've done comparison taxes from time to time over this 11 years to see where we stand with comparative townships. And we're doing pretty good with comparative townships. We're not the highest, we're not the lowest. We're somewhere in the middle, and I take a lot of comfort knowing that we're not gouging our ratepayers. So there is some research to be done when you're comparing taxes, and I'm hoping when Anita has some time that maybe she can provide us with that comparative study again. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes. Sorry, I forgot your name.
No, that's okay. Nicole, yes.
Good for you, Rob.
Nicole Brooks from Tamworth.
Right.
And I want to thank you for that. Both of your points is why I was very gingerly taking my time in trying to understand without speaking out of turn. The big question in my mind was, is it a game of who gets the hit? And that's what I liked. You just created a triangle for us as to say, okay, it's the municipality, is it the average resident person who's not building or doing anything, or is it the developer? So it was really great to hear your point of view as well, because I think that's where the fight is, and why I was thinking in listening to the presentation, what has changed in order to have this come in. And so when we look historically, the population growth has remained the same. So I'm like, so is there a need? Or what is there, is there these projects in the municipality that are being presented to say, we want to build a new fire station, or we want to build this, therefore we're asking for this bucket to come from this individual. And I really thank you as well. And why I had said in my last commentary, I'm still trying to understand my taxes. I used to live in Brampton for 20 some odd years. And so again, now coming into this municipality, very different makeup of what provisions are given through each municipality, like just being like, what am I being provided? What am I paying for? Am I paying for because I have a lot more land, as opposed to, you know, the village in Tamworth versus where I live, where I have a bit more acreage. So that is, I think, is very important. So I'm really happy you at least could give us, without us reading it, a gauge as to where we live. But then I do question saying, and I like, sorry, what the gentleman said, I think I would prefer a phase-in, because we do have to change with the times and deal with bills and money as a community as well as individually, as opposed to being like, put it right here and then you guys suffer to pay for it, especially in a time of inflation, seeing that groceries have tripled and, you know, in prices and what have you. And I think for us who are here, because I'm actually thinking, I think I know all of you through Facebook, that we were like, wait a minute, it sounds really big to hear 150% increase. Where is that coming from? You know what I mean? From what it was before. And then saying, okay, for me, I'm always like, what is the need? What is the reason? And so I want to support what the gentleman that you read said. I think it may be proven to even deal with everyone's palate, comfortability, and adjustment in living expenses of a phase-in as opposed to maybe a plop down in something. And then also having an understanding of who, for lack of a better term, who's getting hit and why. And I think that's then it would become more palatable, because I think part of my reason coming here, outside of wanting to meet all of you and understand more of the township, is saying, how is the money being used? And how then, what am I investing in, right, as the commoner? So thank you so much. This has been really enlightening. And I hope we all come to a common ground, which I think we will.
Thank you. Robert, you had something else? And
Yes, thank you, John. I just wanted to address Sherry's concern about the development charge and, you know, being over here and the taxpayer, the average taxpayer being over here. And my builder friend at the back maybe can bear me out. When somebody is getting an estimate to build a new house, say a first-time buyer, the building fees, the costs of the materials, the cost of the land, everything else, including, I suspect, this development charge, is going to be built into that quote. So all of a sudden, if I were contracting a new house and I were a first-time buyer and the quote was going to be $300,000, that will include the $5,000 or the $4,500, sorry. And maybe the fee will go from $300,000 to $300,000 and $4,500 extra for the development charge, because the developer is not going to eat that every time, that's for sure. In fact, I suspect, and the builder perhaps can bear me out, they're not going to eat it at all. It's going to be passed on to the average person, the average buyer, who is also going to be paying taxes on that same property for the next whatever number of years. Thank you.
I'm just actually kind of confused on, so you just came back, sorry, you just came back with the salt dome thing. Well, how did you build it 20 years ago when you didn't have a development charge?
I guess that would address the fact that our taxes are high. The existing taxpayers paid it.
So that's what I mean. So now you need a couple things, so then you're just going to add in a development charge. Another thing is this township has no jobs. Like it really has 0 jobs for people. So people move here, but they go work in all these other areas. I'm just very concerned actually about this development charge. I think you're going to. It's a great township. I love this township. I like living here. But if you start adding more hidden costs into building, I think you're gonna get less people. So at $4,500 a development charge on 30 houses, that's only $130,000. Like, you know what I mean? It's not. I just don't. If you're gonna deter people from building here, you're gonna lose that in revenue from taxpayers. That's all my concern is.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Fenwick.
Yeah,
Just before you start, Rob.
Oh, sure.
Mr. Murphy, you're still with us?
Oh, yeah, he's still there.
Yeah, anytime you have a comment on anything that's said, feel free to pipe up. Go ahead, Councillor Fenwick.
Go ahead. I think Mr. Murphy's about to speak. Go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
one thing, it's a zero-sum game. If the township proceeds with those capital works and those studies, then someone is going to pay for those costs. And the Development Charge Act is an attempt by the government to equitably allocate those costs. And as we see, a portion would be paid for by anticipated new growth, and a portion of those projects which benefit the existing population would be paid by the taxpayer. Now, I heard members of the public talking about the high taxes, and unfortunately, that's a problem with rural municipalities. Is you have a large, what I heard, agricultural assessment base, which only pay 25% of the residential tax rate, and you don't have any large industrial assessment, which again, the typical tax rates for commercial industrial are a lot higher than residential. So in a typical urban municipality, they have commercial and industrial assessment, which pays a lot more taxes than residential assessment, which pay a lot more taxes than agricultural. So you're stuck in a situation where you have a lot of agricultural assessment, no or very little industrial commercial assessment. So in essence, the residential assessment base bears the brunt of property taxes. And it's unfortunate. But when in regards to development charges, it's a Development Charge Act and Development Charge Bylaw is a revenue tool, which allows municipalities to equitably allocate growth-related costs to those that, in essence, drive those costs or anticipate future development. So it's a fair and equitable way to allocate those costs that are being incurred.
Thanks, Mr. Murphy. Councillor Fenwick.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification, and that's excellent. And yes, as a first-term councillor, I'm surprised at how much I get bombarded with taxes high, services low. But after you get a little bit of experience in the township, you realize we have almost 800 kilometers of roads. And with the tax base being mainly agricultural, we don't have a lot of waterfront taxes either. We have some. Don't get me wrong, we have some. We have Beaver Lake and Vardy Lake, Camden Lake, et cetera. But even Camden Lake, for example, a lot of agricultural backs onto it. Compare that to South Frontenac, for example, and think about the lakes on South Frontenac has and how much they can draw from that. So even though they maybe don't have industrial commercial, they've got that nice, sweet waterfront taxes that offsets a lot of it. So when you start thinking about that sort of thing, and the population of Stone Mills would fit in your average commercial high-rise, which has half a kilometer of road around the whole thing, and you think about that tax base in downtown Etobicoke, it's very difficult to compare the two. And I've learned that as I've gone along in the past couple of years. It's shocking, actually. But we do have a lot of great people in a beautiful space. And that's probably why you're here. Now, in regards to that, I think about our policing budget, which we just got a shock. It's going through the roof. and that's going to come down to the taxpayer, and that's possibly because we have more people. Now, Jake, we have had a bit of a population boom in the past 3-4 years that's not traditional, is it not? Were we shrinking prior to that?
Yeah, I'll answer that question through your worship. Yeah, no, obviously there's cycles. And I would say that I think that there was a slight decrease in the census, you know, in that, I guess, previous to 2012 sort of cycle. And that, yeah, there was a number of censuses where we actually decreased in population. There's not that many, you know, municipalities really anywhere in Ontario that are decreasing in population, you know, especially since the last, you know, 4 or 5 years. And yeah, they're just like all of Ontario, there's been a little bit of a, even in rural areas, a little bit of a jump from your normal construction levels. Certainly they've kind of plateaued or decreased in, you know, due to largely interest rates and and just the cost of construction going up in the last year or so. But yeah, in that post-pandemic era or during the pandemic, certainly there was a you know, where we, you know, arguably doubled the number of permits or doubled the number of dwellings in a year, that sort of thing. But you know, that's in a relatively short period of time, I would say. It's not like it's 10 years of high. But yes, you know, to answer that question, yeah, there has been a certain bump since 2020.
Anyone else? Councillor Woodcock.
Yeah, just some comments on some of the changes that have happened in years. There's like a provincial downloading of costs. So from the 90s on, we've seen social services downloaded onto municipalities, more and more road maintenance that we didn't used to have to pay for. That's more falling on the backs of municipalities. So we've had to pay for more and more things with less and less provincial help, and there's only so many ways we can raise fund. One is the property taxes, the other is a potential development fee, and the other is user fees, and those are the only means that we have to raise funds. Municipalities control about 2/3 of all infrastructure, but only get about 9 cents of every dollar in taxes. So we have a lot of things that we have to cover, and not always with the most resources. So that's just some of the changing that's happened.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Thank you, everybody, for diffusing and just answering a lot of bits and pieces. One of the things within the township that I hear a lot about is the 800 kilometers, right? It seems to be a hurdle every time there's something. It's like the 800 kilometer, the largest number of road kilometers in similar township. My question to that would be, have we looked at boundary adjustment, you know, and sharing with the neighboring townships some of these roads where there's little population. We know that just 41 from Erinsville to Caladar, few housing. Have we looked at negotiating the boundaries in order to have a more equitable number of kilometers to manage? And also, this one will be a comment, just an observation. Just on County Road 15, that was fixed, the potholes were fixed by the township the very prior year, where the county was redoing that road from top to bottom. To me, the optic, I'm just going to leave you with that, the optic was, I would have challenged that particular approach. And have we looked at some opportunities or strategy to avoid these double kind of work in order to make the money go further? Or are we doing, you know, is it part of budget protection? All that to say that I'm not satisfied with that 800 kilometers being a hurdle all the time, because I think if it is a hurdle for most budget, can we look at how we can mitigate that particular risk? Talking hearing Jake mentioning that we might have doubled as far as dwelling or people, what is the impact on tax long-term? Does that give a little bit more wiggle room? All rhetorical question, things to think about. Because I'm very interested in seeing the line by line of where we've been, what the recent change has provided as far as explosion. I mean, we couldn't drive 10 kilometers without new build for a while. Has that created a beneficial impact that could potentially help doing like a step approach, looking at what impact new evaluation are going to be before, or maybe phasing the approach of development fees based on those new findings and new assessment on the dollars coming into the township. I understand infrastructure, you're going to have capital project, capital costs, but do we have a solid of understanding of where we are based on the recent growth and what the requirements are, and do we have all of these itemized in detail? I guess that's what I would be looking for. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Milligan.
I just wondered if someone is going to explain about the county roads and how we do share services, and that County Road 15 is a county road and they hire us sometimes to do work, and just so she understands a bit how that goes.
Yeah. Jason.
Yeah, we do have arrangements with the county to do work on the county roads, and it's actually a service that we provide, and we actually are paid for that service. So it's actually something that covers some of our costs. There is no direct impact, and there is a modest benefit to our road crews doing that county work. So that's still a county road, but the township is paid by the county to do that work. Just on the assessment piece, if assessments go up, does not necessarily equate increases in taxes, because again, the tax rate is set based on the needs of the township to maintain its level of service and pay for the bills in any given year. And so if everybody's assessments go up, the tax rate is calculated on that, and does not automatically include that, mean that there's a huge windfall for the township in additional tax revenue as a result of increased tax assessments.
Yes, thanks for that clarification. Councillor Fenwick.
One thing we did discuss, but we didn't really get into it, is how would a phase-in look? I know that there was mention of it, but I don't know if that was as specific as what the letter we received asking for a 5-year phase-in, or if this is something over 12 months. We'll get that clarification. And also, if we did not introduce development charges right now, and we did delay it for a year or 2 or 3, would we have to redo this current study again? And how much did we pay for this study? So is this something where we're going to be throwing some money in the wind and have to redo this again in a few years at the detriment to the taxpayer? I'm curious.
Do we have that figure right off the top there, Anita, what this particular development charges study is costing us? Is our treasurer, Anita Raymond?
Through you, Revoice, I don't have that right off the top. This has been an ongoing study for at least 1.5 years because of the difficulties of getting the proper information for it by line, and the projects that would be identified in the future for the next foreseeable future in order to come up with a calculation that seems well below our neighbors and our participating other municipalities that would already have implemented development charges that have been available since 1997. It's a mechanism by the province just to allow capital to be funded for future growth and mandated. Not the study or that, but a lot of the capital requirements are being mandated by the province and the federal government. We don't have a choice.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Your worship, so the budget for this study was $21,600. Now, the background study is valid for up to 1 year. So this discussion could be held 12 months from now without the requirement to prepare an updated background study.
What was that number, Mr. Murphy?
2,100, $21,600. I just, again, based on the staff report has the $24,408. That includes HST. So I just divided by 1.13. So it looks like the budget is 21,400. Sorry, not including HST, which I believe you get back from the province. So.
Yes, thank you. Clarifies that. I'm going to wrap this up. It's been a fairly thorough discussion. I would like to reinforce what CAO White said about impacts reassessment. We haven't had an assessment for 8 years, and the letter that Councillor Land was quoting from implied that when the reassessment is done, that suddenly everyone's taxes are going to go up vastly because properties will be valued so much higher. But that's generally not the case. It may be the case with certain individual properties because the value has been added to them through improvements. But generally speaking, the township still has to raise about the same amount of money every year. It will simply be result in less tax rate per $1,000. So the total tax paid doesn't change substantially at all. It's really an irrelevancy. We used to base our assessment, Doug, what was it, on some kind of 1952 valuation?
It used to be on a moving number, on a fixed number.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a bit of a red herring. Certainly some properties, you know, if you just built a waterfront property, yes, where you just had a shack before, sure, it's going to go up. But generally speaking, that's irrelevant. And it's something it's hard for people to get their head around. And as for what is our infrastructure deficit that we're trying to cover with development charges or increased taxes, we're required by the province now and have for several years to do what they refer to as asset management, which means treating our capital assets, our roads, our bridges, our buildings, our equipment, and so on and so forth, as a business asset that declines in value as it's used over time. And therefore, a capital deficit does build up unless you improve it. I'm sure Treasurer Raymond could provide you with figures as to how far behind we may be in certain areas. What I do know is, as I am warden of the county and part of what's called the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, which is 13 upper-tier municipalities, our collective, our cumulative asset deficit is currently $6 billion. If we were simply to raise property taxes to start raising that $6 billion over a reasonable time, obviously it doesn't have to be spent right away, but it's accumulating, we would have a significant property tax increase. Without a development charge, that would fall entirely on existing users. And if we're not adding people, that's fair. But if new people are coming in, they will basically get a free ride if they don't chip in to the increased wear and tear on those assets. That's the theory. It's perfectly valid. Every point that's been raised by Robert, our builder friend, and the rest, it's true. It is inhibitory to development. And that's contrary to getting new housing. This is the rock and hard place we find ourselves in. And trying to find some wiggle room and a way forward, perhaps if we do go with development charges, the gentleman's idea that sent us the letter about phase-in might be something we could look at. We could make them lower. That's something we have to decide. And I thank everyone for coming. It's been a good discussion. I was very tempted to defend our tax rates and restrain myself. I will say one thing, though. If you look at our budgets over the last several years, almost never have they exceeded the rate of inflation in terms of tax increase, and frequently have been lower. We have had 1% and 2% tax increases for the township portion of our budget for many years running now. So although we may have started in a high place, relative to similar townships, we're not doing too badly. It's kind of a choice. You want to live here in this beautiful place, maybe you're going to pay a little more. So thank you. I will conclude the public meeting portion. We did have a motion on the floor to receive all the input. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I will call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors.
Good night, Robert. Thanks for coming. Good night. Thanks. Come again at budget time. Good night. Okay, moving on. We have no deputations this evening. Under items for consideration, we have the Quinte Conservation Authority preliminary budget, asset management plan and fee policy and schedules. Our recommended motion is that comments be forwarded to the clerk by November 14th, 2024. And everyone has read the letter from General Manager Bradley McNevin at Quinte Conservation. Are there any comments or questions that you wish to direct to Quinte Conservation in regard to their budget? None forthcoming at this moment. We do have to November 14th. Can I get a motion to receive that report then? Deputy Reeve Davis and Councillor Milligan, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you. 8.2 is Explore Incorporated Municipal Access Agreement. Recommended motion is that the report entitled Municipal Access Agreement be received and that Council direct staff to enter into a municipal access agreement with Explore Incorporated, stating that the terms and conditions for the construction, operation, and maintenance of its telecommunications equipment located within Township Road rights-of-way, and that bylaw 2024 to be numbered later, being a bylaw to authorize the Reeve and CAO to execute the agreement, be enacted and passed. Can I get that on the floor, please? Deputy Reeve Davison, Councillor Fenwick. Any discussion? Can I just ask, I couldn't wade through the whole legal agreement. Basically, what the company gets, similar to other companies that use our rights of way, is access to our road allowances, ditches, land where their material will go free of charge, and that should any actions by the township disturb or damage it, then we get the bill. And their responsibilities are to notify us if any work has to be done. Is that the essence of the agreement? Is there anything else that's important in there that we should be considering?
Through you, Reeve-wise, the agreement defines the general terms of the agreement with the township for access to those right-of-ways, as you've explained, for specific projects and expansion. There is still a process by which they would be working with our public works staff on the specifics, but this is a broader agreement that defines, again, the broad strokes of those conditions. It is similar to the agreement signed at the county, signed at Loyalist and at Napanee. We have a slightly newer version than what was signed in previous years to these other organizations that did stipulate if there was quote-unquote negligence that there would be some cost to the township. My understanding is that that's maybe possibly added due to experience that they've had in other municipalities. We don't anticipate that to be a huge risk in our township, but it is part of that agreement.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? I'll call the question then. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. So, further to our public meeting, 8.3 is development charges, background study and bylaw, discretionary exemptions and policy procedures. Recommended motion is that council receive this report for information and that the draft development charges bylaw be brought to the November 18th 2024 council meeting for potential adoption, and that council review and provide direction to staff regarding the implementation of discretionary exemptions and phasing options to be incorporated into the draft development charges bylaw to be presented on November 18th, including the following. And I'm not going to read all these proposed exemptions. They include affordable housing, hospitals, educational institutions, and so on. Any discussion? Yes, Deputy Reeve
I
Davis.
noticed in the proposed exemptions, number 6, it says temporary buildings or seasonal dwellings. Seasonal dwellings are a cottage. I think it should be just temporary buildings, to be honest with you. I think maybe that's a typo or whatever, but cottages should be included as residential, I would think. Yep.
Any comments, CBO Detler, on why that might be something to consider, would be exemption for cottages?
I mean, I guess it's included on the list because it could be included on the list as an exemption and maybe is exempted in certain places. It would have been maybe a good discussion to have with John in the earlier meeting. I think just not having hashed it out and it's something for discussion that maybe, I mean, cottages just like, houses do bring, they travel on roads just like we do. And I mean, the line between a seasonal residence and a non-seasonal residence is often blurry and planners struggle with it. So it's potentially something we could look at changing in the proposed development charges bylaw. And I know that there is actually a list of exemptions in the building code for cottages. There's a cottages section in Part 9 saying if you're building a cottage, you don't need to, it doesn't need to meet certain energy efficiency levels and a number of other things. And I've always, as a CBO, struggled because, most of our zones allow for seasonal residents. And, it was just an opportunity for somebody to build a cheaper house and argue that it was a cottage anyway. So, and yeah, it's been a tricky matter for planners for generations.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I'm back in Mr. Murphy's presentation. It says temporary buildings and structures, where in item 6, say temporary buildings, the wording got changed somehow to seasonal. And that I'm really concerned about it because I've seen so many cottages become permanent residences, over time. Almost for a while, years ago, it was a game, build a cottage and then start living in it year round, So I really don't think it should, a cottage should be exempt, to be honest with you. That was the only one that I really seen in there that stood out to me.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I guess, should we vote separately on that to take that out, Randy?
Through you, Reeve-Wise, if council is ready to endorse the proposed exemptions, we could pass the motion as written on here, and that council implement the listed exemptions, and then we can change seasonal structure to a temporary building or structure.
Okay, so I can just call the question as it stands and then ask for an amending motion? Is that what you're looking for?
Through you, Reeve-Wise, so there is no motion on the floor yet. So whoever is ready to make a motion on the floor, it could be that council receives the report entitled Development Charges Background Study and Bylaw Discretionary Exemptions and Policies Procedures for information purposes, and that the draft development charges bylaw be brought to the November 18th, 2024 council meeting for potential adoption, and that council directs staff to implement the list of exemptions, the proposed exemptions below. And then for 6, we would remove seasonal and put structure, temporary structure.
Okay, Sorry, I thought I had a mover and seconder. And I forgot to turn my mic on. So then we have the consent agenda. Is there any item anyone wants to discuss separately from the consent agenda? In that case, can I have a mover and a seconder for the consent agenda? Councillor Fenwick. Councillor Milligan, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And then we have confirmation. Oh, that's in the consent agenda. So is the item from Enbridge Gas. Okay, that's fine. Any notice of motion? Unannounced. Crystal Lee, you're going to suspend yours for now. That's fine, thank you. We have to enter into any announcements. Yes, sorry, Brandy.
Revise just for minute purposes. So Councillor Woodcock on removing your notice of motion from the last meeting?
Yes, I think I'm going to just get an update on that at another time.
Okay.
And then remove the motion.
Okay, thank you. Any announcements? Anyone has any statements you wish to make? I had one or two. First of all, I'm going to be participating in the remembrance ceremony in Napanee as a county warden. I didn't know if anyone from the local Legion had been approached about laying a wreath. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So anyone feel free to take that on if, yeah?
I always attend, so.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to talk to the Legion about possibly representing the township?
We've always put a wreath up,
Yeah, we have,
so
yeah,
I think we should get one and do it, yeah.
yeah, okay. All right, so you can arrange that. That's fine. Yes, I think we have someone here who can probably hook you up. What time is that? 11 o'clock always, is it not? 10:45, yeah, yeah. Yes, go ahead, Wendy.
Someone asked on social media if Newburgh was going to be having a Santa Claus parade, and we've had one in the past, but I hadn't heard anything. I just wondered, has anybody here heard? Okay.
It's December 8th at 1 o'clock.
Okay, anything else? Well, as the rest of you do, I do have a mailbox out in the office. Perhaps unlike the rest of you, I don't remember to clear it from month to month. And I did clear it towards the end of the summer, and I found this. It's from the Association of Municipal Clerks and Treasurers of Ontario. And it's to my attention, and it says, on behalf of the Association of Municipal Managers, Clerks, and Treasurers of Ontario, I'm extremely pleased to announce that Brooklyn Winter has successfully graduated from the Association's Diploma in Municipal Administration. Moreover, Brooklyn has been inducted into the AMCTO's Academic Honor Roll, which recognizes academic high achievers from AMCTO's diploma programs. We believe that this is a tremendous accomplishment and should be regarded with pride by your municipality. And it goes on to detail the history of this organization. To graduate from this diploma, Brooklyn has successfully completed 4 programs: Municipal Administration Program, Municipal Accounting and Finance Program, Municipal Law Program, Employment Law and Human Resources Program. And we hope that you and your colleagues on council will join us in congratulating Brooklyn on this significant achievement. So this is a belated congratulations to Brooklyn. Yes, it does. Yes, well, I just discovered this very recently, Doug. So if we could draft a letter to Brooklyn, Brandy, on behalf of council, for my signature, I would be happy to congratulate her and present that to her personally. But I would also ask that you encourage her to watch this increasingly riveting broadcast, which climaxes with congratulations to Brooklyn. Yeah, yeah, that's great. So that concludes this part of our regular, yes, sorry, go ahead, Wenda.
So you, just when you were bringing that up about congratulations, I'm sure everyone here is aware that Leanne McCauley, firefighter in Yarker, has won another international championship. So kudos to Leanne again.
Yeah, she just keeps doing it, eh? Another world record, yeah. So we do have to enter into a closed meeting. This is permitted under the Municipal Act to consider a matter related to adoption of closed session minutes and advice subject to solicitor-client privilege. Can I get a motion to move into closed session, please? Councillor Milligan, Councillor Land, all in favor? That's carried, and we'll take 5 minutes. I need a drink of water. Okay, we're back online. We've just risen from our closed session and discussed items that are subject to solicitor-client privilege. Do you need anything other than that, Randy?
Just a motion to rise and report adoption of minutes and no further direction provided.
Okay, sorry, Brandy, so you need a motion to approve what was discussed in closed session, including receiving some closed sessions minutes, is that correct?
Yeah, just a motion to rise and report, and what's being reported is there was adoption of closed session minutes, and there's nothing further to report on.
Okay, can I get a motion to that effect? Councillor Milligan, Councillor Fenwick, all in favor? That's carried, thank you. I need a mover for our confirmation bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the township for this meeting. Can I get a mover and seconder? Councillor Land, Councillor Milligan, all in favor? That's carried. And Deputy Reeve Davison and Councillor McDonald move adjournment. All in favor? She's not there anymore. Oh, she was. Okay, Doug and Rob. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Sorry, Wendy, I tried to get you involved.